Hello BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. I've been working on these 3 books this week, and I actually made a little bit of progress. Last week, I had read a grand total of 5 pages, but this week I'm actually moving a little bit on some of these books. So I'll start off with Captain America. Now, I actually don't count this one towards my page count. But I am making some progress on this. This is from the golden age of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in the 1960s. I guess technically the 1960s is the silver age of comics, isn't it? But as with the other Stan Lee and Jack Kirby one I read on the Avengers from the 1960s, I'm finding this underwhelming. It doesn't quite live up to all the mythology. It starts off with some stories about Captain America in the present day, and then it jumps back to Captain America and Bucky during World War II. Sorry, when I say present day, I mean the 1960s, when these were written. Then it jumps back to the golden age of Captain America and World War II, which is, I guess, makes sense. I mean, that's, if you're going to do a Captain America comic, maybe everyone wants to see him during World War II. At the same time, though, I don't know, not completely, but maybe to a certain extent, takes the suspense out of these stories, because you obviously know that nothing important is going to happen because this happened 20 years ago in terms of the current continuity. Current, again, meaning at the time it was written in the 1960s. But yeah, it does have Captain America going up against Hitler again. Although he's brainwashed here by the Red Skull. But yeah, mildly interesting. And then Journey to the West. I didn't make a ton of progress on this book, but I did complete a chapter 44. So the monkey and the monk and the pig, etc., are continuing their journey. And they come into a country where all the Buddhist monks are made to work as slaves. And it's the Taoist priests who are in control of everything. Now, this gets back to something that was in the publisher's introduction of this book, way back in Volume 1, saying it's a Buddhist book, but it was written during a time when Taoism was very popular in China. So there are frequently chapters in which the two ideologies seem to be in conflict. I really don't know that much about either. But at least in this book, they're both portrayed as pathways to power. So that, like, the Taoists definitely have supernatural powers, and the Buddhists have supernatural powers. So I don't know. It does almost kind of leave it open which one is better, huh? Or which one is the greater power. But in this particular country, apparently there was some sort of famine which wouldn't end. And the Buddhist priests prayed to Buddha, but their prayers didn't do any good. But then 3 Taoists came in. And the Taoists are called, what are they called again? They're associated with animals. And since there are a lot of anthropomorphic animals in here, in this book, it's not clear to me if they really are animals or just portrayed as animals. They were something like power of the tiger, power of the antelope. Sorry, I can't find it at the moment. So The monkey goes to make inquiries, and he pretends to be a Taoist. And he talks to two Taoist priests, and he sees the Buddhist monks being worked as slaves, and he says, "I'm a Taoist, but one of my relations is one of those Buddhist monks. Can I free him?" And they say to him, "Oh yeah, sure. You're a fellow Taoist, so we'll do you this favor." So the monkey goes down and talks to them, and finds out from the Buddhist priest what had happened. And then he goes back to the Taoist, and he said, "Actually, all 500 of them are my relation." And the Taoist priest says, "Well, we can't possibly free all 500 of them. We'd be in real trouble with the king." So the monkey loses his temper, as he often does in this book, takes out his iron cudgel, whacks him, and the book says they cracks their skulls open and splatters their brains across the floor. So kills them, essentially. And the Buddhist priests are in a real panic because they said, "Oh, those are like the king's relatives. They're so high favored with the king, they don't have to bow when they come into his presence, etc." But the monkey says, "Oh, don't worry. We have powers of our own." And the Buddhist monks take the monk and the monkey and the pig and the others to one of the monasteries. Now, apparently, all of the monasteries had been torn down, all of the Buddhist monasteries. But there was one monastery left which was allowed to stand because it had like a statue of the king's ancestor from like hundreds of years ago when it had been built. So the king had allowed that monastery to stand. So they're allowed to stay in there. And then when they go to sleep, the monkey gets up on his cloud and goes up in the air, and he sees the hall where the Taoists are all feasting, and the three great Taoist leaders are. So he goes back and he gets Pig, and he gets, I forget who the other one is. I guess it must be Friar Sand, huh? Friar Sand can sometimes be a little bit forgettable in this book. And he brings them back to the feast. And then I guess there are these three Buddhist statues, which must be other people in Buddhist mythology, the three pure ones. What were their names again? Oh, yeah. The original celestial pure one, the precious pure one, and Lord Laozi. Now, Lord Laozi has definitely been referenced in this book before. I don't remember if he appeared before. But he's, I guess, one of the, they're the three Bodhisattva statues. Bodhisattva is, again, part of the mythology of Buddhism. I think they're like lesser Buddhas. So I'm not quite sure what these Buddhist statues are doing in this Taoist hall, but they're there. But the monkey convinces the pig to put the statues in the lavatory, and then they disguise themselves as the statues because they can change their form, and then they eat all the food. And then one of the Taoist servants realizes he's forgotten his bell in the middle of the night, so he goes down to get his bell, and the pig laughs at him, and he runs, and he gets frightened, and he trips over and breaks his bell. So then he goes to get the three Taoist masters. And that's where the end of chapter 44 is. And that's as far as I've gotten. So chapter 45, I guess, is going to continue what happens in that. Okay, and then the Linguistic Wars, Chomsky-Lakoff and the Battle Over Deep Structure, the second edition. So, as I said in previous videos, I've already read the first edition. So this is going over a lot of the same material, only it's the second edition. I'm getting into chapters 4 and 5 this week, which is when the actual linguistic war is breaking out, when when the two sides have formed. And so here is where it gets juicy in terms of the gossip. And I think this is a little subject to memory because I haven't reread the first edition, but I think this is much better explained in the second edition. There's an incident where Lakoff, one of the head of the generative semantics, who's on the other side of Chomsky, and Chomsky's graduate student, Jackendorf, I think was his name. Jackendorf, are at a linguistic conference and they start yelling "fuck you" at each other across the on the microphones. Maybe I'll just read this passage. It says, there was an equally vitriolic and more public exchange between Jackendorf, that's Chomsky's grad student, and Lakoff a few years later at the plenary session of the 1969 Linguistic Society of America conference, which got increasingly heated until Lakoff said, "Well, fuck you." Jackendorf, as Ross remembers it, looked like he'd been slapped in the face. And then he said, "Well, fuck you, George." And for several minutes, they hurled amplified obscenities at each other before 200 embarrassed onlookers. He goes on to note that nowadays maybe fuck is so common that it doesn't mean much, but like in 1969, it was a real shocking thing to say. It's a point he makes a couple of times in this book, that although they're using the word fuck, it was much more shocking back then in 1969. Now, if memory serves, in the first edition, he just says there was some sort of linguistic conference where Jackendorf and Lakoff hurled obscenities in front of each other. Hurled obscenities at each other in front of the audience. Sorry, so sometimes I get a little tongue-tied and mess up my sentences. Apologies. So yeah, in the first edition, he said there was some conference where they hurled obscenities at each other on the microphones. But he doesn't really detail it in the first edition. In the second edition, it comes across a little bit better as a story. As with a couple other incidents here, I think, where he's talking about the animosity that's growing between Chomsky's camp and the generative semantics camp. It comes off with some more meat on its bones, maybe some more details, so the gossip is juicier, a little bit better. And then we get into chapter 5, the vicissitudes of war, which, if memory serves, when I read this chapter in the first edition, I thought, okay, here we go. Now we're going to get into the really juicy gossip. But actually, it's talking about the different theories that are being exchanged back and forth. And it was right around here in the first edition that I completely just lost my grasp of the linguistic theories that they were talking about. I think it's much better explained in the second edition. So far, I'm 158 pages into it. Fingers crossed, but so far I feel like I'm understanding everything. Almost everything. Everything might be too strong. I feel like I'm understanding the argument here, generally, the two linguist sides. So we'll see if I can. I'm in the middle of chapter 5 now. We'll see if I can make it to the end of the chapter and still feel like I'm understanding everything. But so far, I'm hanging with it. Doing much better on this edition than I was in the second. Doing much better in the second edition than I was in the first edition in terms of understanding the basic linguistic arguments. I think it's much better explained here in the second edition. All right.